Why are there so few good Poketubers? Meet Surpa, a fairly popular Poketuber I discovered recently and seems to have a hard time elaborating / setting clear criteria for his lists. Me or B is going to be my avatar for this video. Let's get into his top 5 misused Pokemon.
And up until the 3rd gym, I used a Bidoof on my team as an HM slave because I didn't want to teach any Pokemon on my team HM moves. Eventually, I filled up my team and the Bidoof got boxed. When I finally made it to Sunnyshore's City, I ended up going to my PC to check out the Dialga I just caught and saw the Bidoof and couldn't help but think, poor Bidoof, all he wanted to do was run free and destroy lives in battle. But he never had the chance. Instead, he was forced to learn a bunch of HM moves and only served the purpose of using them outside of battle so I could advance in the game. Well, unfortunately for Bidoof, he has basically been labeled as an HM slave and will forever probably be used as one. Well, misused as one. And this got me thinking. So welcome to the top 5 misused Pokemon.
Whoa! Hold the phone, Mr. Surpa, because I can't afford another one. What classifies as misused? You aren't going to give us some sort of criteria so your audience can see if your choices fit? Do we assume you mean the standard definition for misused? Without the clarification, it makes it difficult to see why you chose these entries. And the line about Bidoof wanting to battle? If that's what you mean for your criteria, then that causes some other problems which I'll explain later.
In the number 5 spot, we have Talonflame, or I guess any Pokemon that has or can have the Flame Body ability. If you didn't know, having a Pokemon with Flame Body in the front of your party decreases the amount of time it takes for eggs to hatch. Being said, it's very useful to people who are breeding or shiny hunting with the Masuda method. In the beginning of X and Y, I was really into breeding because I had never really done it before, and I don't know, it was just fun. And I always found myself having a Talonflame at the front of my party, just helping me speed up the process of breeding with its ever so useful ability. The poor guy, he just wanted to go out into battle and maybe fly me places every once in a while. But since I already owned a battle-ready Talonflame with Gale Wings, the Flame-Bodied Talonflame never touched battle.
Because help bringing life into the world is such a terrible thing, right guys? Alright, on Talonflame here. Let's break this down. First, why is Talonflame being used for breeding a misuse? Just because someone may use it for breeding doesn't necessarily mean it never sees action in battle. And so what if it's just used for breeding? I found it incredibly useful when, like you, tried out breeding for the first time and used my Talonflame for not only hatching, but raising the levels of said Pokemon in the Battle Chateau. With Talonflame specifically, Gale Wings is its other ability, but it's a hidden ability, meaning that it can only be obtained in Gen 6 through trading or the Friend Safari, which you can't unlock until after beating the Elite Four. While Gale Wings is the better of the two, unless you're talking about post-game competitive battling or you traded for one after the game allowed you to have a Pokemon of that level, you're stuck with the Flame Body as an ability, which isn't a bad ability for battling either. 30% chance of burn on physical contact is really useful, especially when burn halves the opponent's attack stat when Talonflame's defenses aren't the best. Talonflame is still viable for the main story with its main ability. There's also the fact that in Gen 6, it's arguable that it's the most encouraging with breeding as of this video because of the super trading feature that made EV trading much easier. There's a trend that gets worse further on, and that's the fact that Pokemon can't be used for anything other than battling, which is bullcrap on many levels, but I'll touch on that later.
The number 4 spot goes to Relicanth. Relicanth was always a less common Pokemon for me. I mean, outside of a couple times in competitive play, I never used Relicanth on my team once while playing through any game. But there was always one time in Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, and even Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire that I used a Relicanth, and that was to catch Registeel, Regice, and Regirock. If you don't know, the only way that you can catch these legendary Pokemon is if you go to the sealed chamber with a Relicanth and a Wailord to trigger the event. This opens up the caves where the legendary Pokemon hide. Even though Wailord is also used in this process alongside Relicanth, I've never experienced misusage with Wailord because I've actually used him twice throughout my playthroughs of Pokemon Emerald. But after I did this event, Relicanth would always go straight to the PC, never to be used again.
The problem with calling Relicanth misused here, at least in Gen 3, is that in Generation 3, Water was a special type, and with Relicanth's better attack stat, it couldn't use its Water type all that well on offense. So, because Relicanth is used as a key to unlock the legendary trio in Hoenn, it's misused? I would say it gives it another purpose. With what I said earlier before the physical special split, having Relicanth as a key does give it a purpose when there are better water types to choose for battle. I'd like to also mention Relicanth's origins. It's based on the Steelacanth, a fish thought to be millions of years old. Yeah, it's a one-time use sort of thing, but if Game Freak designed the game this way, how is it misused? Doesn't it make sense that an ancient fish Pokemon is part of the key to unlocking the legendary trio that were either sealed away or dormant for thousands of years if we go by their Pokedex entries? It honestly makes Relicanth really freaking hardcore, dude! You want these 3 awesome Pokemon, you gotta get me and my bro Wailord here, brah.
The number 3 spot goes to Audino. One of the main perks of Audino is that if it is found in the wild, it gives so much EXP once it's knocked out. This makes Audino very helpful if you're trying to grind your Pokemon up for the next gym or challenge, or if you're doing a Nuzlocke and you don't want to be under level. But one of the main disadvantages of Audino is that it's just not a good Pokemon. Other than it having a good HP stat and relatively good defenses, its stats are really not great. And combined with its mediocre level up moveset, Audino is just not an optimal Pokemon to use at all. And that being said, Audino is mostly only utilized for its ability to give out a lot of EXP once it's killed in the wild. Poor Audino just wants to get caught in battle with, but instead him and all his friends and around are getting decimated by a 10-year-old trying to level up his Pokemon.
Yes, Audino isn't the best stat-wise compared to others, but it does have its uses for support moves. It can learn great offensive and status TMs, which you neglect to mention. Did you forget about Mega Audino? Making it more of a tank to help set up with things like Trick Room, Thunder Wave, and Attract, to name a few. It's still a viable option even if it's not the best. It's also an incredible tank in the NU tier. Sure, it's not the best tier there is, but it's still a beast in that tier. Not to mention, Pokemon isn't meant to be super difficult either. You should be able to get through the games with whatever party you choose. The mentality that a Pokemon is good or bad strictly by its competitive strength disregards what other things Game Freak might want to do with a specific Pokemon. And isn't it giving it a purpose to easily grind off still a purpose? Sure, it's not a great purpose, but still one that Game Freak intentionally put into the game with Audino. Pokemon is an RPG series aimed at kids, and an easy way to help kids level up their mods is a nice thing Game Freak put in.
The number 2 spot actually goes to 2 Pokemon, Bidoof and Bibarel. Since both of these Pokemon essentially do the same thing, but Bidoof is just more common early game, I felt it would only be right to place them here together. As I said earlier in the video, both of these Pokemon have been essentially labeled as HM slave Pokemon. They rarely serve a purpose on any team and are rarely seen in competitive play, unless you run a curse simple Bibarel. And in that case, you're a cool guy in my book. But these Pokemon are pretty much only used as HM slaves. I mean, literally the only upside of Bibarel to Bidoof is that it can learn a couple more HM moves. Come to think of it, I can't even tell if these Pokemon are really being misused. It almost seems as if they were made to be HM slaves. They have bad stats, combined with an amazing learn set for HM moves. It just seems way too practical.
I'm sorry, Mr. Surpa. I regret to inform you that we have to amputate your foot because you just shot it off! If the Bidoof line was designed to learn a ton of HM moves, then that's their purpose. They're specifically designed to be your HM slaves in the Sinnoh games if you didn't want to put said HMs on your team. This is the number 2 spot on your list. If it isn't misused like you said, it shouldn't even be here. If we go by the assumed criteria, Bidoof and Bibarel break it. You also just admitted that there are other purposes a Pokemon can have, so why continue the notion that a Pokemon has to be used for battle? The Pokemon that inspired this list doesn't even qualify, and so help me, don't you dare talk to me or my son ever again.
And finally, the number 1 most misused Pokemon is going to be Ditto. Now, Ditto is a Pokemon with pretty horrible stats actually, all of them being exactly 48, and only having access to 1 move, and that 1 move being Transform. So yeah, Ditto seems like a pretty trash Pokemon, and yeah, that's right. He has minor use in competitive play because of his Choice Scarf Imposter set, which basically creates a clone of your opponent's Pokemon, but faster. But the alternate use of Ditto is that Ditto has the ability to pretty much breed with every Pokemon, with some exceptions like most legendary Pokemon. And for this reason alone, Ditto is number 1 on the list. A Pokemon that just wants to battle alongside its trainer, take down other trainers, and collect gym badges is instead thrown into a daycare with any Pokemon of its trainer's choice and forced to produce offspring. So yeah, pretty disturbing if you ask me.
Before my rant, let's talk about Ditto. Yes, it has crummy stats and became a breeding machine. So, because it's not a great battler and thus not used for battling and people primarily use it for breeding, it's misused. I know Ditto is a Gen 1 Pokemon. It was a neat gimmick as a copycat Pokemon, but with breeding introduced in Gen 2, Game Freak gave it the ability to breed with almost every Pokemon then and now, making its copycat nature a super useful tool for creating the team you want. It's like Game Freak intentionally designed it this way or something. It's later, guys! Now it's time for my rant. The list has a problem of assuming that all Pokemon must be used for battle and nothing else, which is a ridiculous argument because specific Pokemon were designed for things other than battle. Contests are a thing too. Not every Pokemon was meant to be a competitive battler. Some are good at contests, some make breeding easier for said battling, and some are meant to be HM slaves. It makes Pokemon more diverse and interesting. It fleshes out the world. It'd be boring if every Pokemon was great at battling, and if the Game Freak didn't mix it up, the series wouldn't have the same lasting power it does. If we take your criteria of that it must be used for battle, then yes, your picks for the most part would fit, but it wasn't made clear in the first place, and that's a problem. Final thoughts. Surpa, you have great presentation. Your editing is good and overall presentation is great, but I really recommend fleshing out the script and the rules. Clearly, defining the rules for your list will make it so much easier to follow along and improve the quality by a large degree. Alright, now that's done. Let's see what's next up on the chopping block. Crap! I'm Brooke, and I love your guts.